and I call the member for Grundy.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. Well, I'll give the member for Bradfield credit for one thing: chutzpah. Coming in here when Victoria is getting 8 cents in every dollar of the national infrastructure budget, when it got $0 this year, 0 next year, 0 the year after, 0 the year after that, and 0 the year after that, right through to 2020-21 in this budget, but comes in here and speaks about Victorian infrastructure. But of course, this is a budget which cuts $1.6 billion from infrastructure investment this year. In last year's budget, they said it would be $9.2 billion. Instead, it is $7.6 billion. But after that, it falls off the cliff. A cut of $7.4 billion in actual infrastructure investment over the forward estimates, down to $4.2 billion. And this is what the peak industry body, Infrastructure Partnerships Australia, say. The budget confirms the cuts to real budgeted capital funding to its lowest level in more than a decade, using a mix of underspend, reprofiling and narrative to cover this substantial drop in real capital expenditure. There's no new money in the budget, just cuts. Cuts to road funding, cuts to the Black Spots program, cuts to the Bridges Renewal program, cuts to the Bruce Highway, cuts to the Pacific Highway. The fact is, this budget is a con, and one of the biggest cons is their so-called National Rail Fund. This is a budget where they've tried to get the areas where they are behind Labor off the agenda. But when you look at the actual substance, it's not there. So they know they've got a problem on public transport. The fact that they cut public transport funding from every project that wasn't under construction. So what they said was, we'll create this $10 billion National Rail Fund. Oh, yeah. Sounds great, except when you look at the detail. $0 this year, $0 next year, $0 the year after, and $200 million the year after that. Not a single dollar between now and the next election. 2 years ago, they created the NAIF.
How much goes out of that?
$0 has gone out of the NAIF. It's just paid for. The members of the board to float around and have meetings. In this budget, they created another NAIF, the No Actual Infrastructure Fund. That's what they created in this budget, because there is only one new project in this entire budget over the forward estimates: the Far North Collector Road near Nowra. $13.8 million, and the local paper, the South Coast Register, said in their editorial they hadn't even heard of it. They hadn't even heard of this road. If you look at what they're actually doing, they failed to fund the Nowra Bridge, not a dollar. If you look at what they're doing, in a case study, have a look at the Cross River Rail project, approved by Infrastructure Australia in 2012, funded in 2013. I did a little program last night where I was interviewed by a fellow called Campbell Newman. He used to be the Premier of Queensland. This is what he had to say about the project. I said last night we were ready to go. Campbell Newman, well, we were actually. I think the history of it is pretty accurate. Ready to go way back when it was approved in 2012, funded in 2013, cut in 2014. Now, all these years afterwards, saying, oh, we still need more information. Well, here it is. Here it is, a letter from Scott Emerson, Minister for Transport and Main Roads, signed 30th of April 2013 in the Campbell-Newman government, writing seeking confirmation of the funding principles, an availability payment public-private partnership, construction between 13-14 to 19-20, the contribution estimated to be in the order of $715 million each. The Australia and Queensland governments will fund the availability payment stream for the PPP component of the project on a 50-50 basis. the Queensland Government to fund rail operating expenses for the project and it to be delivered through a PPP commercial vehicle and financed by private sector equity and debt. It was ready to go, and I seek leave to table that letter from Minister Emerson.
Leave is not given.
They don't want to see the details of where it was ready to go. No wonder they're embarrassed by the fact that projects that were ready to go were stopped by this government, and years later they're still prevaricating. Now let's have a look at Inland Rail. Inland Rail, they had a little committee, and the committee chaired by John Anderson said this: hence a substantial public funding contribution is required to deliver Inland Rail. Inland Rail. So how is it that they're contributing for this project $8.3 billion of equity? You can only deliver equity injections rather than actual cash funding if a project is going to produce a return. Now, their own documents say it won't produce a return to capital in more than 50 years. So this is just a fix by those opposite. That's embarrassing because it doesn't stack up. And when we asked in Senate estimates last week, the Secretary of the Department indicated that the rate of returns on equity for the ARTC, the Australian Rail Track Corporation, as a whole, rather than for the Inland Rail project. So they're going to take the fact that the coal lines, in particular in the Hunter Valley, produce a return for the ARTC, use that fact to roll that in and pretend that Inland Rail can be funded without a dollar contribution, because there is no cash contribution from those opposite. And then they reduce the cost by actually having an Inland Rail line that doesn't go anywhere, because it stops 38 kilometres short of the port. So you're going to have these double-decker trains with two lots of containers stacked on that are then going to be put on trucks to go through the most congested areas of the suburbs of Brisbane. Just like the Perth Freight Link stopped 3 kilometres short of Fremantle Port, and the WestConnex project goes nowhere near the Port of Botany that was the original idea of the Infrastructure New South Wales under Nick Greiner. The fact is, this is a government that simply can't get any infrastructure projects right. But they've done all this. They've done all this with this idea of good debt, bad debt. The whole rhetoric in the lead-up to the election to the budget was designed to create a smokescreen for the fact that they were actually going to cut funding, And that's why they've established this so-called infrastructure financing unit in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. Now, this is what the peak industry body have to say about that. We cannot identify any currently proposed infrastructure projects which are commercially viable and not already attracting finance. Therefore, we cannot see how the IFU will increase the pace of project delivery. Indeed, this is a solution looking for a problem, because there is not a lack of capital available in this country. We have almost $2 trillion in superannuation funds. We have private capital from here and overseas that's interested in investing in nation-building infrastructure. If you actually fund Infrastructure Australia properly and you actually get the projects right and establish the pipeline of projects, capital is available. But what this government has done is to gut Infrastructure Australia and sideline it, establish this own little unit in the Department of Prime Minister and Cabinet. It's not nation building, this is empire building by those opposite and by the Prime Minister in particular. Because if you look at the details of the budget, there's no new money for cities, no new money for public transport, no new money for major road projects, no vision whatsoever from those opposite. And the fact that you had Campbell Newman there last night conceding the fact that the reason why the Cross River Rail project isn't now almost completed is because of the attitude of the former Prime Minister that's being carried on by the current Prime Minister. All rhetoric and no substance.
The member's time has expired.